Shut it down. This isn't your kind of celebration. Barbara Caldwell's voice cracked across the yard as she stood shoulder to shoulder with the officers, pointing straight at Brandon like she was giving orders. Kayla's fingers tightened around her bouquet as the music cut mid-note and sirens echoed in the background, sharp and accusing. Brandon Reed didn't move as two officers pushed through the guests, eyes locked on him like he'd already been judged. "Hands where I can see them," one snapped, stepping closer, his posture tense, gaze dripping with assumption. Guests shifted back, whispers rising, phones lifting, the wedding collapsing into suspicion. Barbara stayed close to the officers, arms crossed, watching like she owned the moment. Kayla's breath hitched beside Brandon, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't." But Brandon stood still, calm and unshaken, while the woman standing with the cops had no idea who she had just declared war on. Through the lace curtains of Aunt Rita Hayes' guest bedroom, Kayla watched her wedding turn into a battlefield. Cars lined the quiet suburban street, each one drawing suspicious glances from the house next door. The autumn breeze carried music from the small speaker system, along with the sharp voice of Barbara Caldwell complaining to anyone who would listen. "That's another car pulling up," Barbara announced, her voice pitched to Carrie. "How many more people are they planning to bring into our neighborhood?" Kayla's hands trembled as she adjusted her ivory dress. The fabric whispered against her skin, but she barely noticed its softness. Her attention kept dragging back to the window, to the neighbor who seemed determined to poison everything beautiful about this day. Aunt Rita Hayes appeared in the doorway, her face tight with carefully controlled anger. "Baby girl, don't you pay that woman any mind. This is your day. She's out there taking pictures of people's cars, Auntie, like we're criminals instead of wedding guests." Kayla moved away from the window. "I should go out there and nothing." Aunt Rita Hayes crossed the room, her purple mother-of-the-bride dress rustling. "Your man's handling it. Sometimes the best revenge is just being happy while foolish people stew in their own mess." Outside, Brandon stood near the flower-draped arch, greeting arriving family members with warm handshakes and hugs. His dark suit fit perfectly, and his calm demeanor gave no hint of the tension crackling through the air. But Kayla knew him well enough to see how his eyes kept tracking movement, how his FBI training wouldn't let him fully relax. "Look at these people." Barbara's voice drifted up again. "This used to be such a nice, quiet street. Now there's noise, traffic, strange men walking around." Kayla grabbed her bouquet harder, the stems cracking under her grip. "I'm not letting her ruin this." "That's right." Aunt Rita Hayes adjusted Kayla's veil with gentle hands. "Your daddy would be so proud today. Focus on that." Down in the backyard, Brandon directed guests to their seats while keeping one eye on the fence line. He'd noticed the patrol car rolling past earlier, moving too slowly, like it was looking for something. He'd caught Barbara's furtive movements, her phone constantly raised, documenting everything, her body language screaming preparation rather than mere nosiness. "Beautiful day for a wedding," said Uncle Carl, clapping Brandon on the shoulder. "Perfect day," Brandon agreed, even as he watched Barbara's husband Frank appear briefly at an upstairs window, speaking into what looked like a phone. More guests arrived. Kayla's cousins from Chicago, Brandon's former partner from the Bureau, elderly church friends who'd known Kayla since she was small. Each arrival seemed to wind Barbara tighter. She paced along her side of the fence, muttering about property values and neighborhood character. "Should I say something to her?" whispered Kayla's cousin Tanya, glaring at Barbara. "She's making everyone uncomfortable." "No," Brandon said firmly. "Let's not give her what she wants. This is about family and love, nothing else." But the weight of hostile surveillance pressed down on every moment. Guests kept glancing over their shoulders. Children stayed closer to their parents than usual. The joy felt defensive, like something that had to be protected. Aunt Rita Hayes moved through the gathering with determined cheer, topping off glasses and straightening chairs. But even she paused when she saw Barbara photographing license plates, documenting each car like evidence. "Lord, give me strength," Aunt Rita Hayes muttered, then plastered on a bright smile as more guests arrived. Brandon noted everything while appearing to notice nothing. The way Barbara kept checking her watch, her repeated glances toward the street, the tension in her shoulders that spoke of anticipation rather than anxiety. His instincts hummed with warning, but he pushed them down. Today, he wasn't an agent. Today, he was just a man marrying the woman he loved. Finally, the small crowd settled into their seats. The string quartet, just 4 music students from the local community college, began to play. The late afternoon sun gilded everything in honey light, catching on the rose petals scattered down the aisle. Upstairs, Kayla took a deep breath and smiled at her reflection. Ready? Born ready. Aunt Rita Hayes squeezed her hand. You look like an angel. They descended the back stairs as the music swelled. Through the kitchen window, Kayla could see Brandon waiting under the arch, tall and handsome and steady as a rock. The sight of him centered her, pushed back the darkness trying to crowd in at the edges of this moment. The bridesmaids lined up, their blue dresses catching the light. The flower girl clutched her basket, serious with responsibility. Kayla took her place just inside the back door, her aunt's arm linked with hers. Head high, Aunt Rita Hayes whispered, "This is your moment." The quartet shifted into the wedding march. Guests rose to their feet, turning to watch for the bride. Kayla took her first step into the sunlight onto the white runner that would lead her to Brandon, and then the sirens began to scream. The sirens wailed and shattered the gentle wedding music. Red and blue lights strobed across the white chairs and flowers, turning the carefully decorated backyard into chaos. Before anyone could react, heavy boots thundered through the side gate. Police. Everyone stay where you are. 4 officers burst into the backyard, hands hovering near their weapons. Wedding guests froze mid-rise, caught between standing for the bride and responding to the sudden invasion. The flower girl dropped her basket, rose petals scattering across the grass like drops of blood. Officer Mike Dawson stepped forward, his badge gleaming. We received multiple reports of a violent domestic disturbance at this address. Reports of armed individuals and possible gang activity. Gang activity. Aunt Rita Hayes' voice cracked with disbelief. This is a wedding. Look around you. But Dawson was already moving through the crowd, zeroing in on the male guests. Everyone stepped back from the wedding setup. Keep your hands visible. Phones emerged from purses and pockets as guests began recording. An elderly woman in a church hat pressed herself against a tree, trembling. Near the refreshment table, 2 young boys clung to their mother's legs, tears streaming down their faces. This is private property, Kayla said, her white dress catching the emergency lights. You have no right. Ma'am, stay back, another officer ordered, cutting her off. This is for everyone's safety. Through the chaos, Barbara Caldwell appeared at the fence, perfectly coiffed in a peach cardigan. She pressed a manicured hand to her chest in theatrical concern. Oh dear, she called out loud enough for everyone to hear. I was so worried when I saw all those strange men gathering in our quiet neighborhood. You can't be too careful these days. I just want everyone to be safe. Dawson pointed at Brandon and 3 other male guests. You, and you, step forward, hands where we can see them. My son is a deacon, cried one mother, as her grown son was separated from the group. We're here for a wedding. Sir, face the fence, Dawson ordered, ignoring her. Spread your feet. Aunt Rita Hayes moved forward, dignity in every line of her body. Officer, I am the homeowner. This is my property and these are my invited guests. A young officer shoved in front of her. Step back, ma'am. Do not interfere. Don't you touch my aunt, Kayla said, starting forward. But Brandon caught her eye and gave a tiny shake of his head. His face was calm, but she could see the muscle working in his jaw. More police cars arrived outside, their sirens adding to the cacophony. Neighbors emerged onto their porches to watch the spectacle. Barbara's smile grew wider. This is what they wanted, Kayla realized, her bouquet forgotten in her clenched hands. To turn our wedding into a show. Through it all, Brandon remained perfectly still, his back straight in his wedding suit. He kept his voice steady and clear. Officers, there has clearly been a misunderstanding. These are wedding guests, including federal judges, doctors, and sir, I need you to be quiet. Dawson cut him off. We have credible reports of threatening behavior and possible weapons. The only threat here is you, someone called from the crowd. Dawson's hand dropped to his taser. One more comment like that, and people start going in cuffs. The quartet musicians huddled together, their instruments forgotten. The flower girl was crying silently. Near the house, the wedding photographer kept shooting, documenting every moment of the humiliation. Look at their cars, another officer called out. These are some mighty expensive vehicles for this neighborhood. Because they're successful professionals here for a wedding, Aunt Rita Hayes snapped. But you can't see past their skin, can you? Ma'am, this is your final warning, Dawson said. Step back or you'll be detained. Kayla felt her wedding dress growing damp with sweat under the police lights. All their careful planning, all their joy destroyed in minutes by one malicious phone call. She watched Brandon, still perfectly controlled, still protecting everyone by staying calm. Running plates now, crackled the radio. Multiple out-of-state vehicles. Of course there are. Kayla's voice rose. People traveled here to celebrate with us. This is supposed to be our wedding day. But Dawson was already reaching for his handcuffs, moving toward Brandon. Sir, put your hands behind your back. Before you do that, Brandon said quietly, you need to see my credentials. The entire yard seemed to hold its breath. Dawson paused, the handcuffs glinting in the strobing lights. In that frozen moment, police radios crackled, children sniffled, and somewhere in the background, the forgotten wedding music played on. A gentle melody now twisted into something surreal. The backyard fell silent except for the idling police engines and the soft whimper of frightened children. Every eye locked onto Brandon as he slowly, deliberately moved his hand inside his wedding jacket. The officers tensed, but Brandon's movements remained measured and calm. I'm reaching for my credentials, he announced clearly. I want everyone to see this. With precise care, he withdrew his FBI badge and ID, holding them up so the police lights caught the gold shield. I'm Supervisory Special Agent Brandon Reed, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is my wedding day. Officer Dawson's face drained of color. His hand dropped from his handcuffs as if they'd suddenly turned scorching hot. The other officers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier swagger evaporating. Dawson swallowed hard. Sir, we received a credible report of, did you? Brandon's voice remained perfectly level. I'd like the exact wording of that complaint, Officer Dawson, and I want all body cameras preserved right now. The younger officers glanced at each other nervously. One reached up to double-check his camera was running. I also need all badge numbers, Brandon continued, and the name of the dispatch officer who took the call. You disrupted a private ceremony on private property based on an unverified complaint. I want to know exactly how that decision was made. At the fence, Barbara stood frozen, her practiced smile cracking like thin ice. The phone in her hand trembled slightly. She took one step back, then another. Sir, there seems to have been a misunderstanding, Dawson stammered. We were simply responding to what? Brandon asked softly. A wedding, music, black people gathering legally. Please explain the threatening behavior you observed that justified this response. Aunt Rita Hayes stepped forward, her head high. Everyone stand tall, she called out to the guests. This is still our day. Don't let them steal our joy. The guests straightened, phones still recording. The elderly woman by the tree lifted her chin. The young boys stopped crying, watching with wide eyes as the police officers began to retreat. We'll look into the source of the complaint, Dawson muttered, backing away. His earlier condescension had dissolved into naked discomfort. Yes, you will, Brandon said. My office will be following up. We'll need all incident reports, radio traffic, and body camera footage. Nothing gets deleted. Some of the guests began to murmur approval. A few smiled grimly as the officers filed out through the gate, their earlier show of force deflating with each step. Kayla watched her soon-to-be husband, seeing how his control had turned the situation. If he had shouted, if he had matched their aggression, things could have ended very differently. His restraint was not weakness, it was power. As the last police car pulled away, the wedding guests slowly returned to their seats. The quartet hesitantly picked up their instruments. The flower girl's mother helped her gather fresh petals. I'm so sorry, Kayla whispered to Brandon. This shouldn't have happened. He squeezed her hand. Don't apologize. We're still here. We're still getting married. Aunt Rita Hayes took charge, her voice carrying across the yard. All right, now straighten these chairs, fix these flowers. Love is stronger than hate, and we're about to prove it. The guests rallied, adjusting decorations and smoothing tablecloths. Someone turned up the music. The photographer resumed his position. Within minutes, the ceremony reset. This time, when Kayla walked down the aisle, her steps were even more determined. The guests stood straighter, their presence a quiet defiance. The officiant spoke of love and commitment, but also of courage and perseverance. When Brandon and Kayla joined hands, their grip was fierce and proud. What they tried to break, they made stronger, the officiant declared. What they tried to shame, they made shine brighter. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the transformed backyard, Brandon and Kayla exchanged their vows. Their words carried extra weight now, promises not just of love, but of protection, of standing together against whatever came. Through it all, Barbara remained at the fence, her phone raised. Her earlier performance of concern had hardened into something calculating and cold. She recorded every moment, her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes never leaving the couple. But the wedding party ignored her, focused instead on the triumph of the moment. Children resumed playing between the chairs. The quartet played with renewed vigor. Aunt Rita Hayes moved among the guests, offering tissues and hugs where needed. As Brandon and Kayla kissed to seal their vows, the backyard erupted in cheers and applause. The sound washed away the last echoes of sirens, replacing fear with celebration, humiliation with victory. For now, at least, love had won. The ceremony that was meant to be destroyed instead became something unforgettable, a testament to dignity in the face of cruelty, to strength under pressure, to the power of standing one's ground with grace. The string lights twinkled in Aunt Rita Hayes' backyard as evening settled in. The earlier chaos of police lights had faded, replaced by the warm glow of lanterns and the smell of barbecue from the buffet table. Music drifted through portable speakers, and children chased each other between tables, while older relatives settled into their chairs with plates piled high. "Lord knows I've seen some wedding drama in my day," Aunt Rita Hayes announced, raising her glass. "But never have I seen a couple stand so tall under pressure." To Kayla and Brandon. The guests echoed the toast, clinking glasses. Kayla leaned against Brandon's shoulder, trying to lose herself in the moment, in the simple pleasure of being married at last. The food was perfect, the decorations still beautiful, despite being trampled earlier. Maybe now they could just be newlyweds. "Your aunt is something else," Brandon said softly, watching Aunt Rita Hayes direct the younger cousins to refill the ice bins. "She turned this whole thing around. She's unstoppable," Kayla agreed. "When I was little," she used to say, "Baby, sometimes you gotta dance in the rain because waiting for sunshine takes too long." Brandon smiled, but his eyes kept drifting to the Caldwell house next door. The windows were dark now, though lights moved inside occasionally. Barbara had vanished after the police left, retreating behind her expensive curtains. Her absence felt more threatening than her presence. "Come on." Kayla tugged his hand. "The photographer wants family shots while we still have good light." They gathered relatives under the oak tree, arranging heights and straightening ties. Kayla's teenage cousins, Destiny and Tyler, hung back, heads bent over a phone screen. "Kayla," Destiny called out, her voice tight with anger, "you need to see this." Kayla walked over, still wearing her wedding smile. It faded as she read the local news blog post already spreading on social media. "Federal agent causes disturbance at suburban wedding." The article twisted everything, painting Brandon as aggressive and suggesting he had intimidated local law enforcement during a neighborhood incident. "It's already got hundreds of shares," Tyler said. "Comments are getting ugly too." Kayla's hands clenched. "This is impossible. The ceremony barely ended." "How did they?" "Because someone planned it," Brandon said quietly, reading over her shoulder. "This wasn't random spite. The article's too polished, too quick. Someone had this ready to go." "You mean Barbara? Maybe, or whoever she's working with." He studied the byline. Getting this written, approved, and posted this fast means connections, influence. Before Kayla could respond, her cousin Jasmine called out from the gift table. "Hey, there's one more present here. No card, though." The box sat alone on the corner of the table, plain white, medium-sized, tied with a generic silver ribbon. No tag, no decoration. Something about its stark simplicity made Kayla's skin crawl. Brandon reached it first, his FBI training kicking in as he carefully examined the package before opening it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single printed photograph. Kayla recognized their house immediately, the two-story colonial they'd bought months ago, their first home together. But the angle was strange, shot from somewhere hidden and high. The image quality was professional, not a casual snapshot. Beneath the photo, printed in stark black letters, "You don't belong here. This is only the beginning." The reception's warmth evaporated. Kayla felt the joy she'd fought so hard to reclaim turning to ash in her mouth. In its place, anger bloomed, hot and clarifying. "They really think they can scare us out," she demanded, "with this cheap movie villain nonsense?" "No," Brandon said, his voice hardening. "They think they can provoke us into making mistakes. This is about control, making us feel watched, making us doubt our home, our safety." He slipped the photo into his jacket away from curious guests, but Aunt Rita Hayes had already seen their expressions change. She shooed away the younger cousins and approached. "What kind of evil comes to a wedding bearing poison?" she asked quietly. "The kind that's not done yet," Brandon replied. He was scanning the room differently now, his posture shifting subtly. The warm groom was fading, replaced by something cooler and more focused. "Kayla, we should start saying goodnight to people. I need to make some calls." Hugs and goodbyes passed in a blur. Relatives helped pack up food and decorations, promising to return for proper cleanup. Soon only immediate family remained, gathering in Aunt Rita Hayes' bright kitchen while she made coffee no one really wanted. Brandon stood at the counter, studying the threatening photo under the strong overhead light. His fingers traced details in the background, angles, shadows, reflections. He pulled out his phone and magnified sections, frowning. "There," he murmured, pointing to a tiny detail in the window reflection. "See that work truck? White Ford, commercial plates." This shot wasn't taken from the street or any obvious spot. Someone had access to private property to get this angle. Kayla leaned closer, her wedding dress rustling. The truck was barely visible, just a smear of white paint and metal in the glass, but Brandon stared at it like it held answers. Outside, crickets hummed in the darkness where string lights had sparkled just hours before. Their wedding day was ending, but something else was beginning. It was late when Aunt Rita Hayes finally convinced the last relatives to head home. Empty coffee cups and half-eaten pieces of wedding cake dotted the table where Brandon and Kayla sat, surrounded by phones and tablets. Their formal clothes looked out of place now. Brandon's tie loosened, Kayla's veil carefully folded beside her. "Play that one again," Brandon said, pointing to Kayla's cousin Tyler's video. The footage showed the moment police cars first arrived, caught from the side yard. Kayla tapped play, and they watched the chaos unfold again. "There," Brandon paused the video. "Look at the timing. The video showed the police arriving right as the chaos started. Now, check the post Destiny found." He pulled up the hostile news blog on his phone. The article appeared incredibly fast after everything happened. No legitimate news outlet works that fast. Kayla nodded, her wedding makeup still perfect despite the long day. Someone had that story ready to go. They just needed the incident to plug in. Exactly. Brandon spread out printed screenshots, creating a sequence of events. The patrol car had rolled by earlier that evening. Barbara made her noise complaints shortly after. Police arrived soon after that. The blog post followed quickly. Then this, he tapped the threatening photo, shows up during dinner. Aunt Rita Hayes set fresh coffee on the table. That picture wasn't taken today. Look at the shadows, the leaves on the trees. That's from at least a week ago. Good eye, Brandon said. He zoomed in on the reflection that had caught his attention earlier. This maintenance truck, White Ford F150, partial plate visible. I've seen it parked at that vacant house 2 doors down, the old Henderson place. Kayla straightened. I've noticed weird activity there lately. Different contractors coming and going, but never during normal business hours. Always early morning or late evening. What kind of contractors? Various companies, lawn care, pest control, home inspection, but they never seem to actually do any work. They just go inside for a while and leave. Brandon's phone buzzed, a private number. He excused himself to the back porch, leaving Kayla and Aunt Rita Hayes comparing notes about the vacant house. Reed, he answered. It's Special Agent Rachel Mills, the voice was clipped. Professional. Sorry to call so late, especially today. What's wrong? That address you ran earlier, the vacant property near your new house. It's connected to an ongoing investigation, shell companies, property flipping, possible money laundering. We've had complaints about aggressive pressure tactics against homeowners, especially elderly residents in transitioning neighborhoods. Brandon watched shadows move behind the Caldwell's windows. The maintenance company, too, front business. They access properties, scout targets, sometimes stage accidental damage to force sales. She paused. Brandon, if your neighbor problems connect to this, you need to be careful. These people have resources. Back in the kitchen, Brandon found Kayla deep in conversation with her aunt. Remember Mrs. Ellis? Aunt Rita Hayes was saying she came to your office last month about those citations, the code violations that appeared right after she refused to sell. Kayla confirmed. She's not the only one. My nonprofit has helped 3 other families fight suspicious complaints in the past year. All elderly black homeowners, all pressured to sell below market value. Brandon sat down heavily. We need to talk, he explained his call while watching Kayla's expression shift from concern to recognition. That's the pattern, she said. Create problems for targeted homeowners, make them feel unsafe or unwelcome, then swoop in with cash offers when they're desperate to leave. Her eyes narrowed. And now we've moved onto their street. With your history of helping their victims, Brandon added. No wonder Barbara recognized your name before the wedding. This isn't just about race, Aunt Rita Hayes concluded. Though that's their weapon of choice, this is about money. Kayla gathered the scattered photos and papers into a neat pile. So what do? Document everything, Brandon said firmly. Starting in the morning, we photograph, record, and log every interaction, every complaint, every accident, every suspicious vehicle. Build the pattern properly. You should stay here tonight, Aunt Rita Hayes insisted. That threat might be just words, but why risk it? The guest rooms are already made up. They agreed. While Aunt Rita Hayes prepared the room, Brandon did a security check of the house. He moved methodically, testing locks and scanning sightlines through windows. In the living room, he glimpsed movement behind Barbara's upstairs curtain. A shadow watching, then quickly retreating. The revelation that their wedding disaster connected to a larger criminal scheme should have been shocking. Instead, it felt like pieces clicking into place. The calculated humiliation, the prepared media response, the professional surveillance photo. It was never random cruelty. They had stumbled into something organized, something that had already targeted their community. All secure? Kayla asked when he returned to the kitchen. For now. He sat beside her, taking her hand. Their wedding rings caught the light, symbols of joy that now felt like targets. I'm sorry this happened. Don't be, she said firmly. We're together. We're awake to what's happening, and we start fighting back properly. Morning light crept through Aunt Rita Hayes' kitchen windows, finding Brandon already awake and hunched over his tablet. He'd managed little sleep, his mind too busy cataloging details, connecting dots. Their wedding clothes still hung over chairs like ghosts of yesterday's joy and chaos. The coffee maker gurgled as Kayla moved around the kitchen, her movements slower than usual. Neither had spoken much since waking. The weight of everything felt heavier in the morning light. I've got guest videos from 6 different angles, Brandon said, breaking the silence. He had created a secure folder, methodically labeling each clip. Tyler caught the clearest view of Officer Dawson's initial approach, and your cousin Destiny's video shows Barbara making that call. Kayla set a coffee mug in front of him, then sank into the chair beside him. I keep thinking about Mrs. Ellis and the others who came to my office. The citations, the complaints, the pressure. She rubbed her temples. We walked right into their territory without even knowing it. Rachel's calling me back soon, Brandon said. Need to make sure we document everything exactly right. Can't give them any procedural openings. Aunt Rita Hayes emerged from her bedroom, already dressed for church. You two eaten anything? Without waiting for an answer, she started pulling out eggs and bread. Kayla's phone buzzed. It's Tyler. He's been monitoring that blog post. Her face tightened as she read. Comments are getting ugly. Someone's claiming we threatened Barbara before the ceremony. Others are saying we're hostile elements in the neighborhood. Save everything, Brandon said immediately. Screenshots, URLs, especially if you recognize any usernames. While Aunt Rita Hayes made breakfast, Brandon called Rachel. The conversation was brief but precise. Instructions on evidence preservation, incident documentation, and which details might connect to the larger investigation. We should check the house, Kayla said after they ate. Make sure everything's okay. They drove slowly around the block first, Brandon noting every car and camera position. 2 bright orange notices stood out against Aunt Rita Hayes' white fence. Code violations for unauthorized event parking and noise ordinance infractions. The paper looked crisp, fresh. These weren't here last night, Kayla said, photographing them with her phone. They're dated early this morning. Who issues citations at that hour on a Sunday? Someone who had them ready, Brandon replied. Someone expecting to use them. Their own house looked untouched at first glance, but as they got closer, the damage became clear. Garbage was strewn across their carefully maintained lawn. Fast food wrappers, empty cans, torn papers. The security camera above the garage door hung at an odd angle, its lens cracked. Kayla's hands clenched. They were here. While we were at Auntie's, they were here messing with our home. Don't touch anything yet, Brandon said softly. He pulled out his phone and started documenting every piece of trash, every footprint in the morning dew, every angle of the damaged camera. He worked systematically, creating a grid pattern across the yard to ensure nothing was missed. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, but they checked every room anyway. Kayla started a pot of coffee while Brandon set up his laptop at the dining room table. He opened a fresh document and began typing. Timeline of events. The patrol car rolled by earlier that evening. Barbara made her noise complaint. Police response to the call, false narrative posted online, threatening photo delivered, code violations posted early the next morning, property damage discovered. "We need to add everything from before," Kayla said, looking over his shoulder, the contractors at the vacant house, the pattern of complaints against other homeowners. She pulled out her nonprofit's files, spreading them across the table. Case after case showed the same progression: sudden code violations, anonymous complaints, property damage, pressure to sell. What had seemed like isolated incidents now formed a clear pattern. "They target people systematically," Kayla explained, sorting through reports. "First come the small harassments, noise complaints, parking tickets, HOA violations. Then they escalate to property damage, usually made to look random. Finally, they start spreading rumors, trying to turn neighbors against each other, making the target look unstable when they complain." Brandon nodded, creating a paper trail of problems. They worked through the afternoon, building their documentation. Kayla called other homeowners who'd faced similar pressure, carefully recording their experiences. Brandon preserved social media posts, photographed every piece of evidence, and backed everything up securely. At dusk, their phones chimed simultaneously. A new email from the Homeowners Association. Notice of emergency meeting. Recent disturbances in community standards. Attendance mandatory for involved parties. "That was fast," Kayla said grimly. Less than a day from wedding to inquisition. Monday morning arrived with grim purpose. Brandon sat at their dining room table, carefully organizing evidence into a fresh binder while Kayla paced the living room, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, Auntie," she said to Aunt Rita Hayes. "I'm looking at the bylaws right now." "Did anything like this happen when you first moved in?" Aunt Rita Hayes' voice crackled through the speaker. "Baby, they tried everything. First HOA meeting I went to, they spent hours talking about maintaining standards. Like, I didn't know what that meant, but I had all my paperwork perfect. Didn't give them an inch." Brandon labeled another tab in the binder, his handwriting precise. Each section contained photos, statements, and witness accounts, all documented with federal-grade attention to detail. He'd learned long ago that racism thrived in gray areas. The clearer the evidence, the harder it was to twist. "Found something?" Kayla called out, scrolling through her laptop. Years ago, the HOA board tried to pass stricter event guidelines after the Martinez family hosted their daughter's quinceañera. "Look at the language. Protecting neighborhood character and maintaining peaceful community standards. Same playbook," Brandon noted, adding the information to his timeline. "They use official channels to make discrimination look legitimate." They worked through the day methodically. Kayla pulled records of every HOA complaint filed in recent years, creating a clear pattern of selective enforcement. Brandon refined his documentation, ensuring every piece of evidence was properly preserved. Aunt Rita Hayes came over that evening, bringing dinner and decades of perspective. "You need to understand how they operate," she explained, setting out containers of food. "They'll never say the ugly part out loud. They'll talk about property values, about following rules, but watch their faces when they say it." Tuesday arrived with heavy clouds and rising tension. Kayla dressed carefully for the evening meeting, professional but not intimidated. Brandon wore a crisp suit, his badge and credentials secure in his breast pocket. They wouldn't be baited into looking defensive. The HOA clubhouse lights blazed against the darkening sky as they pulled into the parking lot. Other residents were already filing in, some avoiding eye contact, others staring openly. Barbara stood near the entrance, perfectly coiffed, greeting people with practiced warmth that never reached her eyes. Inside, the meeting room was arranged like a courtroom, with the board seated at a long table facing rows of chairs. Kayla and Brandon took seats in the front row, his evidence binder placed precisely on his lap. The room filled quickly, tension building with each arrival. The board president, a thin man named Thompson, called the meeting to order. "We're here to address concerns about recent disruptions to community peace and proper use of residential property." Barbara rose smoothly, performance ready. "As many of you know, the events at the wedding caused significant distress to several residents. While we all support celebrating special occasions," her smile tightened, "we must consider the impact on our peaceful community." She described the wedding as if narrating a threat assessment: too many cars, too much noise, unfamiliar individuals coming and going. Each point was wrapped in concerned civility while painting a picture of invasion. Other residents followed her lead. A woman worried about changing atmosphere. A man suggested stronger restrictions on large gatherings. Each comment carried the weight of unspoken meaning. The police presence alone shows the severity, Barbara added, her voice perfectly modulated. And when law enforcement attempted to address concerns, they faced intimidation. Kayla felt her jaw tighten. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. She started to rise, but Brandon touched her arm gently. Not yet. Perhaps, Barbara continued, federal credentials shouldn't be used to override local authority. The room murmured. Kayla looked at the faces around her, some uncomfortable, some nodding, some carefully blank. This was how it worked. Prejudice dressed in procedure, hatred hidden behind handbooks. When Kayla finally spoke, her voice was clear and steady. The police were called under false pretenses. There was no disturbance until that call manufactured one. Our wedding met every bylaw requirement for private events. We have documentation of all permits and notifications. Mrs. Reed, Thompson interrupted, this isn't about paperwork. It's about community standards. Which standards? Kayla pressed. The ones that only apply to certain residents, because we have years of complaint records showing quite a pattern. Barbara's practiced smile slipped slightly. She'd expected anger, not evidence. Brandon remained silent, watching. His stillness seemed to unnerve Barbara more than any argument could. She kept glancing his way, waiting for an outburst that never came. The board issued their predetermined warnings about noise levels, parking restrictions, and future compliance with community guidelines. Each point landed like a paper cut. Small wounds meant to accumulate. As residents filed out into the dark parking lot, an elderly black woman Kayla didn't recognize brushed past them. Without breaking stride, she pressed a folded note into Kayla's hand and continued walking. Under the harsh parking lot lights, Kayla unfolded the paper. One line in shaky handwriting. They did this to us, too. The parking lot's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the dashboard as Kayla unfolded the note with trembling fingers. Brandon leaned closer, his shoulder touching hers as they read the single line together. There's an address written on the back, Brandon noted, turning the paper over. 1487 Maple Lane. That's only 3 streets over, Kayla said, already putting the car in drive. We need to talk to her tonight while everything's fresh. They found Mrs. Doris Parker's house easily, a modest ranch-style home with carefully tended roses out front. Despite the hour, warm light glowed behind curtained windows. Kayla knocked softly. The door opened just enough to reveal an elegant woman in her 70s, her silver hair neatly pressed. I wondered if you'd come tonight, she said, studying them carefully. You better step inside quick. These streets have too many watching eyes. Mrs. Parker's living room was filled with family photos and the kind of furniture that had been lovingly maintained for decades. She gestured for them to sit on a plastic-covered sofa while she settled into a worn armchair. First, I want to say I'm sorry about your wedding, she began, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Watching that meeting tonight brought it all back, the way they smile while they're hurting you, the way they make rules sound fair when they're anything but. Mrs. Parker, Kayla said gently, what happened to you here? My Harold passed a few years ago, she said, touching a photo on the side table. We'd been in our house next door for decades, raised our children there. But after he died, she shook her head. It started small. Complaints about my yard, letters about paint color. Then someone reported my grandson's car as abandoned when he stayed with me for a couple weeks. Brandon took out his notebook, writing in his precise hand. Did you keep any of those complaints? Every single one. Mrs. Parker went to a desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. The HOA suddenly had problems with things that had been fine for decades. Then the offers started coming, all below market value, all pressing me to decide quickly. Who made the offers? Kayla asked, though she suspected she knew. Different companies each time, but Mr. Caldwell was always lurking around. I'd see him talking to contractors, meeting with Officer Dawson in his car, walking through the vacant houses with men in suits. But whenever I tried to speak to him directly, he acted like he had nothing to do with any of it. Brandon's pen moved steadily across the page. Did you ever see him with any of these contractors? He showed her his phone with the photo of the reflected work truck from their wedding thread. Mrs. Parker adjusted her glasses. That's the same company that kept accidentally cutting my water line while doing work next door. Made my yard die right when the HOA was citing me for lawn maintenance. They talked for another hour, Mrs. Parker's story spilling out in precise detail. The pressure had built until she finally sold to a company called Riverside Holdings LLC for well below market value. She'd moved here to a smaller house, but kept watching. Other elderly residents and minority homeowners faced similar campaigns. Back home, they spread their materials across the dining room table. Neither could sleep. Brandon pulled property records online while Kayla dug through her nonprofit's case files. "Look at this," Kayla said late into the night, pointing to his laptop. Riverside Holdings, LLC, connects back to 6 other shell companies. All have purchased homes in historically black areas or from elderly residents, and all trace back to a parent company where Frank Caldwell is listed as chief financial officer. Kayla rubbed her tired eyes. The truck in the threat photo. It's registered to a maintenance company that has contracts with 3 of these LLCs. And here she pulled out a file. "Last year we helped Mrs. Ellis fight foreclosure. She mentioned suspicious plumbing problems right before the bank pressure started. Same company. They worked through the night following paper trails and connecting dots." Brandon mapped property transfers while Kayla cross-referenced complaints from her nonprofit's archives. The pattern became clearer with each hour. Frank used shell companies to hide his involvement, while Barbara's social influence and carefully targeted harassment drove down property values. By the next afternoon, Brandon had built a preliminary timeline. "They're not just flipping houses," he explained, showing Kayla his notes. "They're systematically pushing out specific residents to change whole neighborhoods. The HOA complaints, the selective enforcement, the police pressure. It's all coordinated." "That's why they came at us so hard," Kayla said, understanding flooding in. "They saw my name on the wedding permit. They knew my nonprofit had helped some of their targets resist selling. As evening approached, they ordered takeout, but barely touched it, too focused on unraveling the web." Kayla went through old intake forms looking for more connections. Late into the night, she pulled a folder from years earlier and froze. "Brandon," she whispered. "Look at this." She pointed to a property transfer document. There at the bottom, clear as day, was Frank Caldwell's signature as a witness on papers from a case where her nonprofit had tried to help an elderly widow keep her home. Kayla's hands trembled as she spread more folders across their dining room table, her wedding ring catching the harsh light of their task lamp. "Look at these," she said, pointing to a stack of intake forms. "Months ago, we helped the Martinez family resist a buyout offer. The shell company matches one of Frank's LLCs. Brandon leaned closer, his notebook already filled with precise columns of names. "Show me the other one you found here." Kayla pulled another file. The Williams case from last spring, same pattern. Sudden code violations, police drive-bys, then pressure to sell below market value. Their daughter came to my office in tears. "And both properties connect back to Frank's network?" Brandon asked, though he already knew the answer. "Through different shell companies." "But yes," Kayla sat back, running her hands through her hair. "That's why Barbara watched us so closely before calling the police. She knew exactly who I was." Brandon nodded slowly. "The wedding wasn't just about race. It was targeted retaliation. They wanted to humiliate me publicly," Kayla said, her voice tight. "To show what happens when someone interferes with their plans. They worked through the night, sorting evidence into categories that could help the federal investigation without compromising it." Around dawn, Brandon's phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, requesting an urgent meeting. "Get some sleep," he told Kayla, kissing her forehead. "I'll handle this part." The federal building's fluorescent lights made Brandon's tired eyes ache as he sat across from Rachel in her office the next morning. He'd carefully selected which documents to share: property records, LLC registrations, and public complaints that couldn't be traced to his personal involvement. "This matches our existing pattern," Rachel said, examining the files. "But Brandon, I have to ask, how did you obtain these records?" "All public sources," he replied. "Property databases, corporate filings, tax assessor records, nothing that required federal resources or privileged access." Rachel studied him for a long moment. "The vacant property near your aunt-in-law's house is already part of our investigation. Frank Caldwell's name has come up before, but you cannot be personally involved in this case. You understand that, right?" "I understand the lines," Brandon said carefully. "Everything I'm sharing is clean. Make sure it stays that way," Rachel warned. "Don't let them bait you into compromising the bigger investigation." While Brandon met with Rachel, Kayla worked her own angles. She called former clients, asking careful questions about their experiences with harassment and pressure to sell. Many were still too frightened to talk, but each conversation added detail to the pattern. "The HOA president showed up at my door every week," one elderly woman recalled. "Always with some new violation, always when I was alone. Officer Dawson gave my son 3 tickets in 1 month, another resident said, just for being parked in front of our own house. Around mid-afternoon, Kayla received a call from an unlisted number. The woman on the line spoke in whispers. "I used to do books for one of Frank's companies," she said. "The paperwork, it wasn't right. False invoices, hidden payments, separate ledgers for certain transactions. Would you be willing to meet?" Kayla asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We can talk somewhere public, wherever you feel safe." The woman hesitated. "Tonight, after work. I'll text you where." When Brandon returned home, Kayla updated him on the potential breakthrough. They spent the afternoon preparing questions and planning how to document anything the bookkeeper might share. "We need to be careful," Brandon cautioned. "If she has direct evidence of financial crimes, it has to be handled properly to be admissible." "I know," Kayla agreed, "but she trusts me because of my nonprofit work. That's why she reached out." "This is what makes us strong together," Brandon said, squeezing her hand. "You build the human connections. I build the legal framework. They never expected us to fight back like this." As sunset painted their living room orange, Kayla's phone chimed. The bookkeeper had sent an address, a coffee shop across town. Kayla quickly replied to confirm. They gathered their materials, selected key documents to bring, and were about to leave when Kayla's phone chimed again. She checked the message and her face fell. "She's gone dark," Kayla said, showing Brandon the screen. The bookkeeper's last message simply read, "Can't make it. Don't contact again." The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. Someone had gotten to their witness. The streetlights cast long shadows as Brandon pulled into the diner's parking lot. He circled twice, scanning for anything suspicious, before parking where they could see both entrances. The neon open 24 hours sign buzzed overhead, its red glow reflecting off the wet pavement. "No sign of her," Kayla said, checking her phone again. The bookkeeper's last message still haunted the screen. "Don't contact again." "We wait a bit," Brandon decided. "If she doesn't show, we leave. No lingering." Inside, they chose a booth with clear sightlines to all exits. A tired waitress brought coffee they didn't plan to drink. The diner was half empty, a couple of truckers at the counter, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a group of teenagers sharing fries. When they were about to leave, a woman in her 50s hurried through the door. Sandra Brooks looked nothing like her LinkedIn photo. Her face was drawn, her business casual outfit wrinkled. She clutched her purse like a shield. "I'm sorry," she whispered, sliding into their booth. They watched the office parking lot. "I had to make sure no one followed me." "You're safe here," Kayla assured her while Brandon subtly checked the windows. Sandra's hands shook as she opened her purse. "I've been keeping copies," she said, "just in case. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know who to trust." She pulled out a manila envelope stuffed with papers. "These are maintenance invoices for properties Frank targeted. The amounts never matched the work done. Some companies didn't even exist." Brandon didn't grab the envelope. Instead, he took out his phone and a small notebook. "May I document how you obtained these?" Sandra nodded, explaining how she'd noticed irregularities in the books months ago. Frank used a rotation of shell companies to hide patterns. Maintenance fees, consulting charges, and code compliance costs were inflated to pressure specific homeowners. "There's a separate ledger for community support payments." She said that's how they track who gets paid to help with harassment. Officer Dawson is in there under a vendor code. "How did you get copies?" Brandon asked, taking careful notes. "I scan everything for our records anyway. I just made extra copies, started saving them to a separate drive." She pushed the envelope closer. "I know what they're doing is wrong. These are people's homes." Brandon photographed each document methodically, logging details. "The originals need to stay secure," he told Sandra. "Store them somewhere safe, not at work or home. A bank box would be ideal." "I already did," she said. "After what happened at your wedding, I knew it was time. They're hurting people who try to stop them." They spent an hour reviewing the materials. Sandra's documentation was thorough. Payment trails, shell company structures, properties targeted for acquisition. Brandon guided her through proper evidence handling while Kayla provided emotional support, helping Sandra feel less alone. When they finally left, Sandra took a different exit. "Be careful," she warned. "Frank has more reach than you think." Early the next morning, Brandon checked the hidden camera he'd mounted under their porch light. The footage showed Barbara on their street at dawn, talking to a young woman who'd recently moved into a rental property nearby. "You just tell them exactly what I said," Barbara instructed in the video. About the loud music, the suspicious visitors, how unsafe you feel. The HOA needs documented complaints. But I haven't actually seen anything wrong, the tenant protested. That's not the point, Barbara snapped. Do you want to keep your lease or not? Kayla watched the footage several times, her anger building. She's not even trying to hide it anymore. Because she thinks she's untouchable, Brandon said. That's how we get them. Pride makes people sloppy. They spent the day organizing everything. Sandra's financial documents, the surveillance video, property records, complaint patterns. Brandon created detailed indexes while Kayla mapped relationships between players. By afternoon, they had a compelling case showing systematic harassment and fraud. When Rachel reviewed their evidence package, her usual skepticism gave way to quiet satisfaction. This is good work, she said. Clean, documented, properly handled. We can move on this. How soon? Kayla asked. We'll start quiet inquiries next week, build pressure gradually, let them think they're still safe while we set up the next phase. For the first time since their wedding day, Kayla felt real hope. Driving home that evening, after securing copies of everything in Rachel's office safe, she allowed herself to imagine justice. Not just for them, but for every family Frank and Barbara had targeted. We did this right, Brandon said, squeezing her hand as they turned onto their street. No shortcuts, no mistakes they can use against us. Together, Kayla agreed. That's what they never counted on. Brandon parked in their driveway, already reaching for his keys. Then he went still, eyes locked on their front door. The porch light illuminated what shouldn't be there, a thin line of darkness where the door stood slightly open. Stay in the car, Brandon ordered, his voice dropping to a whisper. He reached beneath his seat and retrieved his backup weapon, checking it with practiced movements. Kayla gripped the dashboard, her wedding ring catching the porch light's glow. Brandon, please, just this once, stay here until I clear it. His eyes met hers and she saw the shift, the loving husband becoming the trained federal agent. Brandon approached their home with controlled precision, gun low but ready. He moved along the wall, checking windows before approaching the door. The gap was small. Professional work, not smash-and-grab teenagers. He pushed it open with his elbow, scanning the entrance hall methodically. Room by room, he cleared the house. Living room, kitchen, home office, bedrooms, basement. Each space told the same story. Carefully executed invasion, no broken glass, no overturned furniture, no spray-painted threats. This was worse. This was surgical. After securing the final room, he called Kayla inside. She gasped at what most people wouldn't notice, the subtle displacement of everything they owned. Photo frames tilted slightly off-center, cabinet doors not quite flush, drawer contents reorganized with cold efficiency. Don't touch anything, Brandon warned, already dialing Rachel. They knew what they wanted. In the office, his locked desk drawer hung open. The backup drive containing case photos was gone. His handwritten timeline with witness names and connections vanished. The laptop remained, but they'd taken his paper notes, the ones too sensitive to digitize. Kayla ran to check her files. The donor database, she said, voice shaking. All our funding contacts, supporter lists, client records. They took everything. But it was the missing family document box that made her sink to her knees. That heavy metal container had held generations of precious papers. Her grandparents' property deeds, her parents' marriage license, photos dating back decades, letters from relatives long gone. They're trying to erase us, she whispered. Not just hurt us, erase us. Brandon documented everything with his phone while talking to Rachel. He photographed door frames, window locks, drawer angles. Every detail mattered now. Police would come, but this was beyond local jurisdiction. The precision proved it was connected to their case. His phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline knocked the breath from his chest. FBI agent accused of misusing federal resources in neighborhood dispute. The article was devastating. Quotes from anonymous sources claiming Brandon had weaponized his position to harass innocent residents. It mentioned the wedding incident but twisted it, suggesting he had intimidated local police. There were hints about unauthorized surveillance, abuse of power, and concerning pattern of behavior. They were ready, Brandon realized. They hit us and immediately launched the smear campaign. This was coordinated. Rachel arrived with a forensics team. Her face was grim. Brandon, this is bad. Internal Affairs is already asking questions. Until we clear this up, you have to step back completely. They're trying to isolate us, Kayla said, just like they did to other families. But why take the family documents? Brandon wondered aloud. Those have no investigative value because they hurt. Aunt Rita Hayes' voice came from the doorway. She had driven over the moment Kayla called. They're not just attacking your case. They're attacking your roots, your history, your belonging. That box proved your family's story on paper. Through the night, they gave statements and watched investigators dust for prints they knew wouldn't be found. Every call to Sandra Brooks went straight to voicemail. Her emergency contact number was disconnected. The next morning brought more blows. Sandra's apartment was empty, not ransacked, just empty, like she'd vanished into thin air. The property manager said she'd terminated her lease overnight, paid a penalty in cash, and left no forwarding address. Kayla's phone rang in the morning. The nonprofit board wanted an emergency meeting. Their largest donor had expressed concerns about recent controversies. The same donor who had previously praised Kayla's work now worried about organizational stability. They sat in the boardroom for hours. Kayla presented facts, context, but fear had already taken root. Board members spoke about temporary leadership transition and protecting the mission. They suggested she take a leave of absence while things settled. "Everything we built," she said later, staring out the car window, "all those families we helped, they're dismantling it piece by piece. We'll rebuild," Brandon promised, though his own career hung by a thread. Rachel had made it clear. One wrong move now would end 2 decades of service. They drove to pick up Aunt Rita Hayes from church. She'd insisted on attending despite everything, saying, "Evil wins when good people hide." Kayla spotted her aunt first walking down the church steps in her Sunday best. Then she saw the dark SUV accelerating up the street. "Brandon!" she screamed. The SUV jumped the curb. Aunt Rita Hayes turned at the sound of grinding metal on concrete. The SUV's tires screamed against concrete as it swerved back onto the street, leaving dark rubber marks where it had jumped the curb. Kayla's heart hammered as she and Brandon sprinted toward Aunt Rita Hayes, who stood frozen on the church steps, her Sunday hat knocked askew. "Aunt Rita." Kayla reached her first, wrapping protective arms around the older woman. "Are you hurt?" "They wanted me to see them coming." Aunt Rita Hayes' voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. "That driver slowed down first, made sure I knew what was about to happen, like a message." Brandon scanned the street, memorizing details with trained precision. Black SUV, late model Ford Explorer, heavily tinted windows, no plates visible. He pulled out his phone, already documenting. The church's security cameras might have caught it. "This isn't random," Aunt Rita Hayes insisted, gripping Kayla's arm. "They knew exactly who I was and when I'd be here. Been coming to this church for decades, never missed a Sunday service." Other church members gathered around them, offering water, asking questions. Brandon called it in, but he knew how this would play. No injury, no collision, just another unfortunate incident that would disappear into a report. "I'm so sorry," Kayla whispered, helping her aunt to a bench. "This is because of us. Because you hosted the wedding. Don't you dare apologize for evil doing what evil does." Aunt Rita Hayes cut her off. "I survived worse than some coward in an SUV, but you two listen to me. They're escalating because they're scared. You must be closer to something big." For the first time since the wedding, real anger cracked through Brandon's professional calm. His hands clenched at his sides. "The family documents," he said, "the box they stole. They're not just trying to compromise the case anymore. They're sending a message about family itself." "Then let's get back to work." Aunt Rita Hayes stood, adjusting her hat with dignity. Evil doesn't get to win just because it shows its teeth. They drove Aunt Rita Hayes home, swept her house for signs of tampering, and set up temporary security cameras. Brandon's jaw stayed tight the whole time. Kayla knew that look, discipline holding back rage. Back at their own house that evening, Brandon spread everything across the dining room table. Wedding photos, guest videos, security footage, witness statements. "We start over," he said from the beginning. "Something's there that we missed." Hour after hour, they reviewed every moment of that day. Kayla's walk down the aisle, the police invasion, the badge reveal. Each clip showed another angle, another detail. Wait. Near midnight, Brandon froze one frame. There, in the chaotic background of a guest's shaky phone video, partially hidden behind flowers and police lights, Frank Caldwell stood by the patrol cars. His hand extended briefly toward Officer Dawson, passing something small. "Not panic," Brandon said. "Payment." Kayla leaned closer. The racism was just cover. She realized Barbara's harassment, the HOA pressure, even the police response. It's all part of their property scheme. They use prejudice like a tool. Brandon's voice was cold. Create fear, drive people out, buy cheap, flip expensive. The whole system runs on bias and corruption. But why target us specifically? Why risk attacking an FBI agent? Because your nonprofit was already interfering with their plans. Then I married you, giving them a federal problem in their own backyard. They couldn't ignore that risk. As dawn painted their kitchen windows the next morning, Kayla's phone lit up with an unknown number. "Hello, this is Michelle Brooks, Sandra's sister." The voice was cautious, measuring each word. "She told me to call if anything happened to her." Kayla put the phone on speaker. Brandon moved closer, silent but alert. "Sandra's alive," Michelle continued, "but she's terrified. She says she'll only talk to you, Ms. Brooks, not the FBI, not the police, just you." "Why me?" "Because years ago, your nonprofit helped our mother keep her house when those developers tried to force her out. Sandra says you understand what these people do to families." Kayla met Brandon's eyes. He nodded slightly. This had to be her call. "Where?" Kayla asked. "The Pine Ridge Motel off the interstate, room 115. Come at sunrise." Michelle paused. "And Ms. Brooks, be careful who you tell. They have people everywhere." The line went dead. Kayla and Brandon prepared methodically in the pre-dawn darkness. He checked his weapon and backup piece. She gathered a recorder and blank notepads. Neither spoke much. They knew this meeting could change everything or be another trap. The sun was just breaking over the horizon as they pulled out of their driveway. Kayla watched the golden light touch their neighborhood's perfect lawns and manicured hedges. Behind those pristine fences, how many other families had faced the same pressure, the same fear, the same cruel machine that turned racism into profit? "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "we don't stop until this ends." "Together," Brandon agreed, his hands steady on the wheel as they drove toward the interstate. The Pine Ridge Motel waited ahead, either holding the key to breaking this case or another layer of danger. They would find out soon enough. The Pine Ridge Motel squatted against the sunrise, its neon sign flickering weakly above weathered concrete. Room 115's door creaked as Kayla and Brandon entered, revealing Sandra Brooks hunched on the bed's edge while her sister Michelle stood guard by the window. "Thank you for coming." Sandra's voice quivered. Dark circles ringed her eyes and her fingers wouldn't stop twisting a tissue. "I shouldn't have run, but after they broke into your house, I knew what they were capable of." "You're safe here," Kayla assured her, sitting slowly in a worn armchair. Brandon remained standing, positioned where he could watch both the door and window. "Nothing about this is safe," Sandra whispered. "Frank Caldwell. He's not what people think. Everyone sees Barbara causing drama, being the loud, racist neighbor. But Frank, he's the real monster. He just wears better camouflage." She reached for a laptop bag beside the bed. "I kept backups, encrypted files, recorded conversations, everything. Frank thinks he got it all in the break-in, but I've been documenting things for months." Her hands shook as she pulled out folders and flash drives. "The property scheme goes back years. Frank sets up shell companies, makes connections with local officials, then waits for Barbara to do what she does best, make targeted neighbors feel unwelcome." "How deep does it go?" Brandon asked quietly. "Deep enough that half the neighborhood board is compromised. Frank handles all the money and favors. He pays off code enforcement to write violations, gets police like Dawson to increase patrols around specific houses." Sandra's voice strengthened with each revelation. Barbara truly believes she's protecting the community, but Frank just uses her prejudice like a weapon. When black families or advocates become problems, he points Barbara at them and lets her racism do the dirty work. She opened her laptop, pulling up spreadsheets and audio files. "Here's the proof. Every shell company, every false violation, every payoff. Frank keeps perfect records. He's too careful not to. This one shows how they targeted elderly homeowners on fixed incomes." Kayla leaned forward, recognizing addresses. "These are all properties where my nonprofit tried to help families fight predatory buyers." "Exactly. When you started interfering with deals, Frank flagged you as a threat. Then you married a federal agent and moved into their territory. They couldn't ignore that risk." Sandra clicked another file. "Listen to this." Officer Dawson's voice filled the room. "Just keep the pressure steady. More citations, more calls. Make them nervous enough to sell, but not angry enough to lawyer up. Once the price drops below market, our friends can move in clean." Brandon's jaw tightened. When was this recorded? Months ago. There's more. Frank's memos about which violations to fabricate, which officials to contact, how to structure the property transfers to look legitimate. Michelle spoke up from the window. Show them the Caldwell email. Sandra nodded, opening another document. This proves Frank was ready to sacrifice Barbara if anything went wrong. He kept records of her worst behavior, her explicit comments about race, called it insurance in case he needed a scapegoat. He's documenting his own wife's racism to protect himself, Kayla said in disgust. Frank doesn't care about race or community or anything except profit. Sandra explained Barbara's prejudice is just another business tool to him. He'll use anyone, even his wife. Brandon studied the evidence with careful precision. We need to transfer this through proper channels. Make it admissible. I won't testify publicly, Sandra said quickly. Not yet. These people have connections everywhere. Kayla reached for her hand. My nonprofit has safe houses, witness protection programs. We've helped other families stay secure while building cases. Let us protect you. Sandra's shoulders relaxed slightly. That's why I called you first. You understand what families risk when they stand up to power. Over the next hour, they worked methodically. Brandon coordinated with Rachel, establishing clean chains of evidence. Kayla connected Sandra with trusted advocacy groups. Every document was copied, verified, and secured through proper federal channels. By early afternoon, Rachel confirmed the evidence was strong enough for warrants if they could provoke Frank into one more obvious act. We need a public forum, Kayla realized, something legitimate that forces them to respond in real time where witnesses can see. It has to be soon, Sandra added. Before Frank realizes what's missing, they crafted the plan carefully. Kayla would announce a neighborhood justice forum through her nonprofit's official channels. The topic, predatory housing practices and community displacement. The timing, Monday evening. Frank won't be able to resist tampering, Sandra predicted, and Barbara will try to shut it down publicly. That's what we're counting on, Brandon said grimly. They spent the afternoon securing Sandra and Michelle in a safe location, triple-checking evidence transfers and coordinating with Rachel's team. As evening approached, Kayla sat at her laptop and composed the forum announcement with deliberate care. The post went live. Community alert. Join us Monday evening for an urgent forum on predatory housing practices affecting our neighborhood. All residents welcome. Justice requires sunlight. Through their front window, Kayla watched Barbara Caldwell read the notification on her phone. The woman's face twisted with familiar outrage, but this time, that predictable anger would help expose something far darker than simple prejudice. Monday morning crept over the neighborhood like a held breath. Kayla stood in her kitchen, reviewing her presentation notes for the Justice Forum while sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from community leaders confirming their attendance. Through the window, she watched Barbara Caldwell power walking from house to house in pressed khakis and pearls, clipboard in hand. The woman's measured smile barely concealed her desperation as she rang doorbells and cornered neighbors in their driveways. She's telling everyone I'm trying to start a race war, Kayla said, showing Brandon another angry text from a resident. Says I'm destroying property values with inflammatory accusations. Brandon nodded, typing rapidly on his laptop. Let her keep digging. Rachel's team is monitoring all the financial activity. Frank's been making calls since dawn. Is he scared yet? He thinks he's being careful. Started moving money between accounts, reaching out to contacts at City Hall. Brandon allowed himself a small smile. Every transaction, every call, every meeting, it's all evidence now. By mid-morning, Kayla's nonprofit office buzzed with activity. Volunteers arranged chairs at the community center while her staff coordinated with local media. She'd invited 3 reporters who had previously covered housing discrimination stories. They wouldn't be easily intimidated by neighborhood pressure. Reverend Johnson confirmed he's bringing people from his congregation, her assistant reported, and Mrs. Parker convinced 5 other elderly homeowners to testify about the pressure tactics they faced. Good. We need voices they can't dismiss. Kayla checked her watch. What about the property records? All copied and ready for distribution. Building code violations, tax assessments, shell company filings, everything that shows the pattern. Across town, Brandon met Rachel in an unmarked car, reviewing surveillance photos of Frank's morning meetings. The images showed him entering law offices, banks, and the private back room of an upscale coffee shop. He's trying to shore up his defense, Rachel observed. Called his attorney early, then started damage control. Classic consciousness of guilt. What about Dawson? Officer Dawson called in sick today. Smart move on his part. She handed Brandon another file. We've got teams in place for tonight. Just keep your distance once things start. This has to be clean. By early afternoon, Barbara's campaign of intimidation showed signs of backfiring. The more aggressively she pushed, the more neighbors started questioning her motives. 3 families she'd pressured called Kayla, asking to speak at the forum. A retired teacher sent screenshots of threatening HOA emails she'd received after reporting suspicious activity at vacant properties. The wall of fear is cracking, Kayla told Brandon during a quick lunch. People are tired of being bullied into silence. Just remember to stay focused tonight, he cautioned. Barbara will try to derail the conversation, make it personal. Don't let her. I won't. This isn't about her racism anymore. It's about exposing the whole corrupt system that enabled it. Late afternoon, sun slanted through the community center windows as Kayla arranged Sandra's evidence packets on a table. Each contained property records, financial documents, and witness statements carefully organized for maximum impact. On a screen behind the podium, she queued up photos showing the pattern of harassment and displacement. By evening, people began arriving in steady streams. Church groups, housing advocates, elderly residents aided by family members, local journalists setting up cameras. Kayla recognized faces from her case files, families who had fought against fraudulent code violations and predatory offers. They nodded to her with quiet determination. Frank just pulled into the parking lot, Brandon texted. 3 lawyers with him. Rachel's people are in position. Barbara burst through the doors, perfectly coiffed but slightly flushed. She immediately began working the room, touching arms, whispering warnings, trying to organize a walkout, but the atmosphere had shifted. People met her practice concern with cold stares or turned away completely. Frank entered more cautiously, hanging back near the wall with his legal team. His eyes darted around the packed room, cataloging faces, measuring threats. He checked his phone compulsively, perhaps realizing how many of his morning calls were about to become public record. At the start time, Kayla approached the podium. The room fell silent, except for the soft whir of camera shutters. She arranged her notes carefully, took a slow breath, and looked out at the gathered witnesses. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to discuss a pattern of corruption and displacement that has gone unchallenged for too long. Many of you have lived it. Others have watched it happen to your neighbors. But tonight we bring receipts. This is ridiculous. Barbara's voice cut through the quiet. She strode toward the front, pearls gleaming under fluorescent lights. I will not let you slander our community with these baseless. She stopped abruptly as several people in the audience stood, badges glinting at their belts. Frank's face went slack with recognition. His phone slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers clattering on the floor as federal agents moved to secure the exits. Barbara's face contorted with fury as she jabbed a manicured finger toward Kayla. How dare you bring this circus into our neighborhood? These accusations are nothing but jealousy from people who couldn't maintain property standards. The mask of civility cracked completely. Her voice rose higher, more strident. We worked hard to build this community. We have standards. And now you people think you can just march in and... Mrs. Caldwell. Kayla interrupted calmly. Would you like to explain these documents? She held up a thick folder. Because they show exactly how those standards were weaponized to force sales. This is harassment. Barbara spun to face the audience. Can't you see what they're doing? They're destroying everything we built. They're changing the whole character of what exactly? Kayla's voice cut through the tension. A neighborhood where elderly black homeowners mysteriously face code violations until they sell at a loss. Where police get called on family gatherings. Where wedding ceremonies get treated like crime scenes. Cameras clicked rapidly as Barbara's composure disintegrated. Her carefully styled hair fell loose as she gestured wildly. You have no right. No right. This is our home. We decide who belongs here. Frank tried to push through the crowd toward his wife. Barbara, stop talking now. But she was too far gone. Decades of polished bigotry erupting into plain view. You think that badge makes you special? She sneered at Brandon. You're still just Mrs. Caldwell. Brandon stepped forward, his calm voice filling the stunned room. Please sit down. It's time to review the evidence. He moved to the podium with measured steps, placing his own folder beside Kayla's. The room fell silent as he began methodically laying out the case. Security footage, financial records, property transfers, witness statements. His delivery was precise and devastating. The wedding day police call was coordinated in advance, he explained, showing photos. Officer Dawson received payment shortly before responding. That same pattern appears repeatedly in cases where homeowners faced harassment. Frank's lawyers shifted nervously as Brandon continued. Shell companies tied to Mr. Caldwell acquired numerous properties in recent years. In many cases, elderly or minority owners reported aggressive code enforcement, suspicious police calls, and HOA pressure before selling well below market value. He displayed Sandra Brooks's ledgers on the screen. These financial records show regular payments to code enforcement officials, local police, and HOA board members who helped target specific homeowners. Rachel stepped forward. Badge displayed. Frank Caldwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and violation of federal housing statutes. Other agents moved in as she read him his rights. Frank's face went slack as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Through the windows, red and blue lights flashed as more law enforcement vehicles arrived. Officer Dawson was already in custody, picked up at his home minutes earlier. Barbara stood frozen, watching her husband being led away. Her perfect world crumbled in real time as Rachel announced expanded investigations into HOA board members and local officials who enabled the scheme. The next few days brought waves of consequences. Search warrants uncovered Kayla's stolen files and family documents in Frank's office safe. 3 HOA board members resigned. The police department launched an internal review. Local media outlets that had amplified the smears against Brandon now ran stories about systemic corruption and housing discrimination. Kayla's nonprofit received an outpouring of support. New witnesses came forward daily. Donations and grants poured in to help affected families. The neighborhood's culture of fear began to crack as more residents spoke up about harassment they'd witnessed or endured. Days later, the street looked transformed. Music filled the air as Kayla and Brandon hosted a celebration of justice and community. Tables lined the sidewalks loaded with food brought by neighbors who had finally chosen courage over complicity. Children played freely on lawns that had once been weaponized for exclusion. Aunt Rita Hayes held court from her porch, surrounded by church members and longtime residents, sharing stories of survival and resistance. Sandra Brooks sat with them, no longer afraid to be seen. Other families who had been forced out returned to reconnect with old neighbors who now greeted them warmly. As evening settled over the gathering, Kayla and Brandon swayed together on the same patch of grass where their wedding had been interrupted. String lights twinkled overhead as music drifted through the warm air. This time there were no sirens, no accusations, no fear, just the sound of genuine joy and healing. A black sedan crept past, windows tinted but not dark enough to hide Barbara in the back seat. Her lawyer was driving her home from another round of depositions. She stared out at the scene she had tried so hard to prevent. Black families laughing freely, children playing across property lines, a community celebrating its own resilience. But her power was gone. The neighbors who once hung on her every word now turned their backs as the car passed. Her carefully cultivated influence had evaporated in the harsh light of exposed truth. She watched Kayla and Brandon dancing under the stars, their love and defiance a final testimony to everything she couldn't destroy. Here is a beautifully written, emotional 250 to 300-word paragraph based on the story, crafted in fluent, expressive American English. In the quiet moments after the applause faded and Edward Harper walked his familiar route once more, cane sweeping steadily across the Chicago sidewalk, a powerful truth settled over everyone who had followed his journey. No matter how dark the world becomes, no matter how cruelly someone tries to strip away your dignity, your strength, or the last precious thing left from someone you loved, they can never take who you truly are. Edward didn't fight back with anger or bitterness that day. He simply refused to break. He stood with quiet grace, held on to his humanity, and trusted that justice, though slow and imperfect, still moves through people who refuse to stay silent, through a son who chose precision over rage, through neighbors who chose courage over fear, and through a community that chose to stand up and clap for a blind man who had never stopped walking. This story reminds us that real power isn't loud or violent. It lives in unwavering dignity, in the patient love of family, and in the stubborn belief that doing the right thing, even when it hurts, eventually matters. Life will try to break you. It may snap the very things you hold dearest. But if you keep your head up, your heart steady, and your values intact, nothing and no one can steal the light inside you. Edward Harper proved that on those Chicago streets, and his story now belongs to all of us. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment when someone tried to break your spirit, yet you chose to stand tall anyway? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If Edward's quiet strength moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story that reminds us what it truly means to be unbreakable. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.